Good morning, everybody. My name is David Eves. This is a slide that's just about some of the things that, just to give you context about who I am. I kind of live in three different spaces simultaneously. I do a lot of work in kind of the negotiation world. There's a book called Getting to Yes, which some people may have heard of. It's like been a kind of bestseller for like I think 40 years now. It's like these business books that like never leave the top 10 list. It's incredible, like the 1 Minute Manager and like so. And I had nothing to do with the writing of the book or the researching it, but I worked for the guys who wrote it, and so I gleaned some things off of them. And so I do actually a lot of work with, especially environmental groups, advising on negotiation strategy and teaching them on how to negotiate, so Greenpeace around the world, things like that. I've always been a public policy geek for as long as I can conceivably remember, so I advise a number of governments on kind of technology and public policy and the interface of kind of people and government through the digital. And I've been an open data advocate for a long time. I wrote the motion that helped create open data in the city of Vancouver, which was the second city to do open data after the city of Washington, D.C., and then helped many other governments think about their open data strategies, some who wanted help and some who maybe didn't, but got it anyways. And so I kind of live in the nexus of these three places. And some of the things that I do, I trained a lot of the fellows, the Code for America fellows. I still do it every year, but for the first 2 years of Code for America, I moved to San Francisco in January and would train all the fellows. And I do actually that with the Presidential Innovation Fellows at the White House as well. I usually spend a day or two with them at the beginning of their stage to kind of just really teach them how to hack bureaucracies, which is kind of what I want to talk to you guys about today. Whenever you're involved in a community of people, there's all sorts of things that are going around, signal sending, letting people know what you think of their contributions or how they are interacting with you, misunderstandings that are really easy to have. This is one of my favorite. I've kind of edited some things to not reveal the actual people, but I remember when Thunderbird, which is an old Mozilla project around email, was out, I submitted my first bug, and I was like really proud. I was like, this is my first bug, I just submitted it, here's the bug number, hey friends, if you work on Thunderbird, go check it out. And the first comment I got back from a staffer of Mozilla was, I bet you it's a duplicate, which is kind of like, let's take all the energy and buzz that you have and just like kill it, it's just like, and the thing was, it's interesting because this guy, he was not being malicious, and in fact, actually, he'd be right over 50% of the time. So from a purely factual perspective, he was being accurate. He had better than 50% odds of being correct about that. But from a community building perspective, I'm not really sure this should be like the first experience that you have when you're like, I'm excited to be here, and they're like, yeah. And that's hard, especially for people who are like real veterans of something, because they're like, oh yeah, I know that you are experiencing the magic for the first time, but let me tell you the reality about the magic. And I'm there sometimes too. You get like more jaded. So how do we avoid this experience? This is another one of my favorite tweets. This is David Walver, who knows that I'm doing this. It's just a wonderful line, less out of the kind of community space, but more the open source space. But I think we've all felt this way. The part about open source I dislike the most is that everyone else is always wrong, and they just don't immediately understand that I'm right. Often a problem, again, in movement-type driven organizations where we're all driven by an ideal, and of course my interpretation of that ideal must be right, and you guys just need some time to figure that out. And once you do, then it'll all go smoothly. And so what I want to talk about for the next kind of 45 minutes, and maybe actually do kind of more exercise and fun, if you've seen me before, there might be some repeat stuff, but hopefully you'll still find it engaging, is really talk about some of the dynamics that impact our ability to work effectively together. And I think this is true both within kind of brigades or social movement community groups of people trying to figure out what priorities are or how to work together, but also kind of picking up on Aldona's great speech yesterday, how we work with people who actually share goals with us, but have very different motivations or are in different types of institutions, have different pressures on them that make them feel like they're actually not aligned with us or maybe working in opposition to us. One of the kind of core tensions that you often see in these types of relationships, so let's say between a brigade and the city, or within a brigade, or within any social movement, within Greenpeace, that's for sure, is when people are working with other people, they feel that there's this tension between the relationship that they're going to have with those people and the substantive outcomes that they want to achieve. And the kind of traditional negotiation trade-off that people feel is they go, well, I can get better outcomes, the things that I want to have achieved, but in order to do so, I may find myself sacrificing on the relationship. Or conversely, I'm pretty sure I can get people to like me, but in order to do so, I will not get the things that I want to achieve in my city or within the brigade or within the organization or group that I'm a part of. Does anybody feel this tension in there right on? So if only to make me feel better, please raise your hands. But hopefully this is real. So I've got too much substance. So let me just do actually a brief question here. If let's say you're up in this quadrant up here, where things tend to go your way substantively, but maybe when you walk down the hallways, people like duck out of the way, they go to their cubicle. When you go to eat in the cafeteria, you eat alone.
We call that the Jeff Bezos square.
Right on, the Jeff Bezos square, because he really does not care how your day is going. What are the long-term implications of being in this quadrant? Any thoughts? Yes?
People are less likely to come to you with new ideas or things that make them.
Yep. So people are unlikely to come with you with new ideas. You're going to you're going to be put outside of information loops because they're like, David's such a jerk. Why would I go to him with this idea? Why would I ask for his help? Why would I try to get him engaged? Other challenges of being up in that quadrant. Yes. In fact, you may have to kind of constantly find new people to fool because the people that you do deal with don't want to deal with you anymore and so actively avoid you. Or alternatively, will begin to develop kind of an immune system to your approach. We're like, oh, well, you're going to be a jerk. Well, now I know you're going to be a jerk, so I'll be a counter jerk. And we'll just make nothing happen. And so it begins to grind to a halt. So either you have to find new people or you have to keep changing tactics. So my experience with this quadrant is actually it's a really unstable quadrant. You have to work quite hard to stay here. And it can be enormously exhausting. You have to find new people to fool or new tactics by which to kind of get people to do what you want. And it's very, very hard to say. There's enormous pressure. What about over here? Let's say like you're the person everybody always likes, but you never seem to be able to get the things that you need. What are the long-term implications of that quadrant? Yeah, just straight. They're very real. Like it's like, hey, you're a nice guy, and you don't perform the things that we need you to do, and so you need to go find somewhere else to work. We laugh, but actually it's quite true. Being here, it can be unsustainable literally from a job perspective. Other challenges of being in this quadrant. Yeah. Yes. It is enormously frustrating to be like, it is nice to be liked, but why am I never getting the things that I actually need? And sometimes you'll actually have noticed there's someone who's like always seems like super friendly and super nice, and then all of a sudden they turn like into Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, I can't remember which is the reverse, and they suddenly become this like overly aggressive person, and you're like, what just happened? And it's because like there's a lot of anger that is going to build up internally if you're in this quadrant. It is a highly unstable quadrant as well. You're going to get fired or you're going to get frustrated, and you're going to take it out on someone. And the worst part is the people you take it out on are probably not even the people that are causing it or that you're interfacing with regularly. It's like probably your friends or someone. So there's enormous downwards pressure to this quadrant, which sadly, this is a highly stable quadrant. The bad substance, bad relationship. I can confidently say I have had relationships in my life that have like remained firmly in that quadrant. I could do a brief workshop on how to get there quickly. The really frightening thing is the closer you are to someone, the faster you could know how to get to that quadrant because you would know exactly what buttons to push. And the really insidious thing about this quadrant is once you are there, it can be doubly hard to break out because you begin to build systems to cope with being in that quadrant. So you're like, oh, actually, I don't really need to get out of this quadrant. It's like, I just don't talk to that person ever. There's all sorts of things you do to kind of make it comfortable to be here, even though it's so suboptimal. So what I'm interested in is in movements, especially between groups that maybe don't see eye to eye or feel like they have conflict, how do we move up to this quadrant, which I actually think is highly stable? And you might believe, well, David, you have to say it's stable because that's kind of what you do. But I think actually all of you think it's stable too. So I want everybody to think just briefly for a moment about somebody in your life with whom any single time something goes wrong, like hypothetically, someone forgot the 10 pole pegs when going camping, and it was raining, let's not name any names, or like, something goes wrong at the office, like, somebody misses a deadline and it's really throwing everybody off, that no matter what happened, you and that person are going to be able to go to like the local coffee shop, into the living room or the dining room, or into an office, and you have a high degree of confidence that you're going to be able to figure out what to do about that problem. Does everybody have at least one person in your life who you feel like that is true? Raise your hand if you've got. I'm hoping that most of you are dating or married to that person. As an aside, that would be a good outcome. That does not mean you should go marry or date that person that you're thinking of. Please don't confuse those two things. So here's what I just want you to stop and recognize for a moment that we actually all have people in our lives in which we are in this quadrant. You can actually recognize if you stop and think about, oh yeah, there are things that I'm doing that I am already skilled enough to be up there. I do things that make me be there. What really blows my mind is if I were to talk to you about negotiating or influencing people, the moment I use that negotiation word, that N word, I'm willing to bet none of you are thinking about the person with whom things are probably going to go well because you're going to go have coffee, and no matter how problematic it is, you're going to figure it out. You only use the negotiation word the moment you've already decided that things are probably going to go badly. So just stop and just think about that for a second. Before you've had any conversations with anybody, before you've decided like what the possible outcomes could be, you have already mentally checked into a state where you believe a conversation is going to go badly. And as a result, I strongly suspect that you're engaging in a whole bunch of behaviors that are going to ensure that it goes badly. Likewise, if you've already decided like, oh, I'm going to have coffee, you've already decided that the conversation is going to go well. And you are now engaged in a whole bunch of behaviors that are very likely to ensure that the conversation will go well before you've even thought about what the plan's going to be or opened your mouth or even seen the person. So the question we have to be asking ourselves is, why are we predetermining that things are going to go up here, and why are we predetermining that things are going to go down there? And what could we be doing to hack ourselves to figure out what the behaviors are that the skills you already possess today that allow you to be in this quadrant, and apply them so that you can use them across a broader set of conversations, including those that are going to be difficult or thorny, and with players who you feel are actually in opposition to you. And that's kind of what I want to just talk a little bit about today, because in our kind of movement, in our groups, we don't have a lot of financial capital. The main thing we have is social capital. And if we can lubricate the conversations that we have with one another to lower the number of arguments, particularly unnecessary arguments that we have, in order to figure out ways that we can align our interests and work together more effectively, we can allow our social capital to stretch itself much, much, much further. And we can attract much more social capital because people will be like, not only is that a fun group to be part of, not only are they doing important work, but they are incredibly respectful of one another, and they figure their problems out in an effective and respectful way that makes me want to be part of that, because even the thorny issues are done in a way that is completely amazing and transformative, and I want to be a part of. So to do this, I kind of want to maybe open up with a little bit of an exercise. Can everybody find a partner really quickly? Find a partner sitting next to you, ideally, at the table. Everybody's like happenstance. Does anybody not have a partner? And then what I want you to do is make sure there's a piece of table in front of you and your partner. So piece of table, move things out of the way, glasses out, gone, paper, pens. So Code for America has given me some swag, and I have one or two pieces of swag that I'm able to give out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it out to the person who, and maybe there's me a few people who do the best. We're going to play a little exercise called the arm exercise. It's very, very simple. You're going to pair up. You've already done that. Your goal is to earn as much money for yourself as you possibly can. The way that you earn money is you need to get your counterpart's knuckles to touch the table or the plane of the table. So what I want you to do is, again, move this stuff out of here. I'm just going to use you as an example. Just stand up just so everybody can see. I want you to grab your counterpart's hand just like this. Perfect. And then obviously we'd have the table here. And every single time I can get his knuckles to touch the table, I will earn a point and make money. And there's absolutely no talking allowed. I get very nervous when public servants violate rules. So there's no talking. Please don't violate those rules. I don't want to report you to mayors or officials. No, you can't. There was no talking. And then you're a public official even. Wow. And of course, not all of you have a table to get the knuckles to touch. So if there's a plane of the table, like that's not a hack where you can automatically win. It's like there's no table on my side, sucker. So if there's a plane of the table, we'll just assume that the table is there. So everybody, we're going to do this very quickly. Grab your counterpart's hands. On your marks, no talking. I get very nervous. On your marks, get set, and go. And stop. Okay. So let's do a brief survey here. Who raise your hand if you got raise your hand if you got 0 points? Right on. Right on. Raise your hand if you got 1 point. The winners. Raise your hand if you got 2 points. I got a few with 2. 3 to 5 points. Raise your hands. Okay, I got a couple here. 5 to 10 points. Anyone get more than like 11 to 20 points? Yeah, yes, a few here. Okay, so let me just stop here. Any thoughts or reactions to this exercise? Yes. It's either win-win or lose-lose. So tell me more about what you mean by that. Yep. Right. You either are cooperating and winning, or you're in resistance, and you may win, but you might win 1 point or 2 points very, very hard. Okay, excellent. Other thoughts or reactions? Yes. All right. So you could begin to hack the process, right? So this is true. We'll hold that thought, Brigade. Yeah, hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Other thoughts or reactions? Yes. You felt bad. So tell me what. Bracy's strong too. That's like, you must have some real cannons. Why did you feel bad? You don't. It's like you're in a process where you're like, I'm doing this and I'm winning and that's good, and yet I somehow don't feel good. Yep. Yep.
Trust is important. I'm not sure I had totally understood what was going on, but he gave me the look. He was like, "We got this," and I was like,
"Okay, we're good. We got this."
And then he started doing it. I'm like, "Oh, I got it."
Right. So I love this exercise because it is a wonderful metaphor for every negotiation that you're ever going to be in, and even in almost every conversation you're going to be in. I could literally do like 2 days on this, but we won't. Don't worry. I have to be somewhere this afternoon, so do you. So we're all saved. But you are sending signals to people about what your intentions are the moment you sit down and begin to talk to them. The moment here in this particular exercise, the moment that you sit down, you are beginning to send signals to the other side about what you want to be accomplishing and how you want to behave. More importantly, though, you are having to even fight all of this baggage about what you expect you should be doing and what you want or think you are supposed to be doing. The moment I say the word negotiation, a lot of people immediately have all this baggage that comes, like it just comes into them. So they're like, oh, I'm going to sit opposite the table from this other person. Maybe there's going to be some green felt. We're going to be wearing uniforms. There's going to be flags. We're going to be shaking hands, doing photo ops, and then we're going to like beat the crap out of each other verbally until we get the things that we want. And that is like, that's what a negotiation is. And it's like, well, who told you that? Like, where did all that baggage come from? In this exercise, you also bring a whole bunch of baggage into the room that actually have nothing to do with this exercise. Did I ever at one moment use the word arm wrestling? No. I never said we were arm wrestling. I said, no, now we're going to arm wrestle. Even the title up there just says exercise. But what did I do? I put you all in a situation in which you think you are enormously familiar. Like who here is not familiar? Everybody is familiar with arm wrestling, right? You've all at least seen it on TV if you don't do it. You've not done it with your siblings when you were a kid, right? Like we all know that it exists as a thing. And so the moment I put you into that thing, I didn't say you could only earn 1 point. I didn't say, you have to like actually exert force. As the gentleman here pointed out, I didn't even say you had to stay holding hands. I didn't say any of those things, but I put you into a situation in which you are familiar, and you've downloaded a whole bunch of your own rules and decided you wanted to apply them. Now, to be fair, like don't trust the facilitator is a good lesson to also take out of this, because it's pretty hard to hack yourself out of that rule set, but I didn't give them to you. And so once you have downloaded that rule set, it's very hard to lock out, because then the first thing you then do is you immediately grip the other person's hand, because you're like, okay, well, now I need to get ready to arm wrestle. And if I grip your hand, what's the message that I'm sending to you?
I'm gonna win.
That's right. I'm good. Like the very first thing that I grab your hand, if you exert any force, the other person's like, whoa. Okay, I know what we're doing here. It's like, if I didn't know before, I do now. So the most subtle thing, the very early, most subtle things that you do. Now think about that from your interactions with city staff or your interactions with brigades. Like all sorts of things can be triggering to people. Like you walk in with a suit because you work at a city and wearing suits is what you do. And like brigade people are like, oh my God, suit people. Like that's the type of BS. That's the squeezing of the hand in that moment, right? Like you're like the lizard part of your brain is already deciding what the outcome of this meeting is going to be and what these people are about and what their motivations are and how they're going to behave and how you should behave with them as a result. Like think of like all of the stuff that is happening in that split second. And what's really frightening about it is you're not even conscious of it. You're not even making the choice that this is how you want to behave. You're simply allowing baggage to determine how you will behave. So in this exercise, some people did actually start to go back and forth, which is the most common hack. Raise your hand if you guys went back and forth. Awesome. If some of you may have done this before, and some of you may not, like somebody who's never done this exercise before, you were talking about you had a guy, he kind of looked at you, like so there was no talking, right? So was it just like he like looked into your eyes and the room melted, like the room melted away? There was a moment.
I just felt so trusting.
It was beautiful. It was. Meanwhile, Bracy was over there. She was crying. It was a real contrast. And so once you realize that you do want to hack your own rules, in this particular game, power shifts immediately from who has strength to who is able to communicate effectively. Because on an arm wrestling rule set, like whoever has more power is the person who works out more by chance. But now, once you say, well, there's a different world, your ability to communicate with that person becomes the most important thing. And so some people, it's like they look into each other's eyes. I saw somebody over here like doing this just before they grabbed hands. Sometimes you see the head bob, I get a lot of that. And you've got to find ways that you're trying to communicate with other people. And the really frightening thing is it can't always happen just once. You might actually have to do it a few times. Like I remember the first time I played this game, so I sat down, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I know what's going on. We're like arm wrestling. And I grabbed the guy's hand, and they said go. And my counterpart started pulling his hand down, which is another wonderful signal that you could send about your intention. Like if you're pulling your hand down, you clearly are not trying to be aggressive. What do you think I did? No, not even. I resisted. I was like pulling his hand up. Because in an arm wrestle, anything good for them is bad for you. Your brain is so locked in there, so I was like fighting it, and like literally a second goes by, I'm like, why am I fighting the wrong way? And so first thing is like recognize people, even if you are trying to communicate more effectively, you're trying to overcome, they've got their own baggage they're trying to get over. So doing it once isn't necessarily going to magically transform them, because you know what my second thought was? I was like, oh, right, yeah, no, this is awesome, boom. And I was like, my second thought was not like, oh, this person's trying to work with me and we're doing amazing. I was like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't understand what arm wrestling is. This is awesome. And then we get down, and then the resistance starts. And I'm like, now you're going to fight back? So I'm like over here. And then, it took me 2 or 3 messages from this person for me to actually understand that they were trying to communicate something different to me. I see all sorts of negotiations where people go in and they're like, well, I did something nice and they were jerks back, so it's all on them for how this goes on forward. Like if the success is all dependent on them. And I'm like, so you sent one message and they didn't reciprocate and therefore you're giving up? They have their own baggage they got to get over. Most times a message that feels out of context but is positive will be seen as a trap. So you've got to actually work a few times. Again, you got to refiguring out, how am I going to communicate effectively? How am I going to get over my own baggage? And for me, that maybe the most powerful example of thinking about what power looks like in this type of exercise is, I was not there. I was told of one that was run in like an investment house in London, where like the senior partner, rugby playing, kind of like all of the cliches you can imagine about a British person are there, was paired up against this scrawny like mathematician intern. So you've got this like big 45, guy who's like just huge against this tiny little 18-year-old kid, and we say go, and the kid lets go of the partner's hand, looks at him in the eye, and grabs both his knuckles and just starts rapping the table as quickly as he possibly can. And the partner's kind of like, oh yeah, and then he immediately starts to do it as well. And it's a wonderful example of all of the notions of what you think are power are actually wrong in that moment, and that there are other forms of power that actually have vastly greater impact, that if they can be understood and harnessed, can change the dynamic. And so for me, this is like my second favorite slide. You need to be hacking yourself constantly to be thinking about what are you doing. So if you're getting a result in a conversation that's not particularly great, one of the things you could do is be like, well, maybe I could be behaving differently. So in our case, it would be like, I'm going to be more aggressive. I'm going to use more force. And if you're really smart, like and you've like worked for McKinsey, you're like, oh, I'll go rethink our strategy. That's what we need to do. But what you actually need to be doing is rethinking your goals. Because everything that happens from beat them onward is already predetermined. I don't care. If your goal is to beat them, I don't care how creative you are when you're thinking, the strategies available to you are limited. So if your thought in the first few moments of a conversation with a brigade or with a new person in a brigade is kind of like, oh, this person doesn't know what they do, what they're about, they don't know anything about government, they don't know anything about tech, then like you've already decided educating them is my goal, and I don't care how creative you are around educating them, you've already narrowed yourself to a very fine possible range of activities that you could be engaged with that person, and probably most of them don't involve engaging in any inquiry and trying to figure out what they actually know and what they're actually about. Even more importantly, and the most difficultly, you've got to go and figure out what your assumptions are and try to figure out, what do I actually believe? And in this case, the pie is fixed, that there's only 1 or 2 points to be gained. That shapes the beat them goal and everything that comes after it. And the leap to understanding that actually the pie is not fixed is the huge one you've got to make. But you've got to go really deep to understand that one. And what we want to be thinking about is a different set of assumptions, which in many cases actually, especially when you're in movements, I think are actually quite beneficial, which is how can we actually be thinking of ways to expand the pie, at which point your goal becomes how do we maximize the benefits to the people in the room. And your goal then is your strategy's got to be collaborative, at which point your actions are actually how do I communicate as effectively as I possibly can, and you can possibly come to a high value outcome. I can't guarantee that doing this always leads here, but I can guarantee that doing this basically always leads there. And you may get lucky and you can behave this way and get there once. But if I now said, okay, stand up, everybody pick a new partner for the arm exercise. Like people who got 1 point are gonna, or zero, people who got 1 point and who clearly beat the person are gonna have a harder time finding partners than the people who got 20 points. Because people are like, I want to work with that person. So you got to be thinking about this as an iterative game. And then there's just a whole set of assumptions. When we think about those assumptions, there's a whole set of them. The resources are scarce versus we can create them. They are my opponent versus they're a teammate to be working with. These are all things for me that are really foundational to the way we need to be behaving with one another, both within brigades, within Code for America, and within cities with one another, and of course across between one another, and with all the other stakeholders that we're trying to engage, from people who have iPhones to the communities that feel underrepresented. How are we making them all teammates in this conversation, and trying to find ways to maximize all the kind of the interest that people have across this. And I think most importantly, this last one I really love. The assumption that they are crazy, evil, or stupid is the most debilitating thing that you can do, because if someone is truly crazy, evil, or stupid, this is kind of short form for irrational. It means that you've actually decided now they cannot be engaged with anyway. If you truly believe this, you should walk away and no longer be trying to engage them. It is not a good use of your time. A truly irrational person, it doesn't matter what inputs you put in, pure random will come back, and that's like why engage in that. My experience has been that most people do what they believe is in their best interest. They may believe that what's in their best interest is hurting you. That doesn't make it less real or less true. It just means that you have a very different problem. You have a relationship problem you got to solve with this person, not a substance problem. And you got to get on with doing that if you want to move forward. So this is actually, you may think this is a label that you apply to them that forgives you for anything, but actually it's something you've chosen that's actually constraining your range of actions in a really profound way. And what you've got to be doing is think about how they can believe in how you can understand and get in their shoes and understand what's in their best interests. Let me just stop briefly. There's one last thing I'd love to do with you guys because I'm conscious of how much time we have. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Perfect. No, thank you, Bracy.
How do you know where to draw the line there? Because I'm speaking for a lot of big leaders in the room who, when you open the door to anyone, you get a lot of people who might be crazy. And how do you know when you need to say, actually, you are at a point now where you're damaging the community? And
Yep.
Go?
Yeah. So for me, I think you owe it to them to take a really strong run at them, to be like, I need to understand what it is you care about and what it is you want to achieve and how you feel the actions you are taking are advancing that agenda. Because I want to separate whatever they're doing that makes them look crazy, let's try to connect that to a goal that they have. Because there's two possibilities. One is you may connect it to a goal that they have and you're like, hey, that is awesome to hear. So if you're open to it, I'd like to talk to you about how the things that you are doing I don't think are actually advancing this goal that you have. And let's talk about the effectiveness of engaging in this brigade and having the things that you want to bring to it be heard and become part of what we do. And I'm not sure that things that you're doing right now are an effective strategy. You can keep doing them, but I can tell you it's alienating me, and I think it's alienating other people, and I'd love to support this goal, and right now I don't feel like I can. I think more profoundly, you'd be like, if the goal itself is actually problematic. I don't want to pick something that would just be offensively wrong, but if we figure out that the goal itself is just problematic, then I think it's nice because you're like, oh, I was angry at the behaviors, but actually it's the goal that's the problem. And so we need to have a conversation about whether your goals are actually part of the goals of what the brigades believe in, because I'm not sure that they are. And if you want to advance this goal, you need to go find another group to go do that. But you're no longer saying, I think you're a bad person, or you do stupid things or things I don't like. It's like you just have goals that actually, now that I understand they're in our organization, the reason they don't make sense to me is they're not aligned with our goals. And the goal here in part is to depersonalize the conversation and say it's not actually that you're evil, you just don't want to do things that we want to do. So you shouldn't do them here.
To your point about, sometimes what's in the best interest if somebody is actually going to harm you or hurt you or whatever, and in that case, what you need to do is focus on the relationship.
Yeah.
But that also assumes that the other person understands the value of the right-hand column.
Yes.
Because
No, I don't know that it does, but I hear, please keep going.
so basically saying that you can try to work on the relationship as hard as you want, but if the other person thinks it's a zero-sum game and that you are competition for the limelight or whatever,
Yep.
then no amount of it's just
So nothing about this for me preempts us having a conversation about the values of the organization and what we think people, like a code of conduct and the way that we want to behave and treat one another. And so you can say your goals can even be right, but we have a value set that we believe here in the brigades, and we have a way of treating each other we believe that right now I don't feel is being adhered to. And if you're saying that, is actually you have the relationship problem with them. And so we want to be like, we need to have this conversation. And I don't think it's going to be easy, and I don't think it's going to be pretty. I want to be clear, nothing about what I'm saying here necessarily means the conversations are going to go well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the conversations are going to be happy. But what I do want to say is you do need, if you don't have that conversation, I actually feel like you're not honoring the problem, and you're not honoring your ability to engage that person. And I want to go one step further. I also accept there may be a point where you're like, we have actually tried to have this conversation several times with someone, and I have no problem with a group or a movement saying at a certain point, we simply say, we've actually really tried with this person, and it's just not a match, and you need to step aside. You just can't go there quickly, because you send a message to everybody else. You're like, well, if somebody decides that you're not adhering to something that we like, we're going to remove you. Is a very strong statement. You've got to go there cautiously.
How do you think about the applicability of this to negotiations that involve more than two parties?
Yep.
So like titles like brigades, governments, and startups, like are the strategies different? Like should you always have all three parties in the room talking about equal interests, or is it
It's
talk to each party one-on-one?
there's no right answer to that question. Like sometimes sequence matters. Sometimes it's actually better to have everybody in the room. Can I come back to that? I'd like to show another set of slides, and I'll try to touch on it quickly in the very limited time that we have. Any other is this interesting to people so far as well? Let me do a gut check. I see some heads nodding, so I'm going to take some confidence in that. Please.
In your, what do you call it, the arm wrestling competition?
Yep.
Arm wrestling. I think a twist on it might be instead of what benefits in that game, instead of what benefits the person, $1 million at a time or time touches, for public service, a lot of times you think about what's good for the community.
Yep.
So if you change it so every time you're not going, the other person's not going, or touch the table, something good happens for some community, right?
Yep.
That would be an interesting experiment to see how we're going to have those folks arm wrestle to see if they're not talking about winning themselves,
Somebody else.
how that would result.
Yeah, and would they still, because I have a high degree of confidence people would still arm wrestle. Some people would still arm wrestle, like, well, I'm the one who's going to bring the good to the community. No, I'm the one who's going to bring, and some people may, but I'd like to think it would be easier, but actually you'd be surprised when in the arm wrestling paradigm, it is hard to break out of. You know, even when your goals are altruistic, you're still trapped in a system. And it's actually a wonderful example of like people trying to do good things trapped in a rule set that actually shapes their behavior have a hard time breaking out of that rule set even when they're motivated to do the same thing or drive to good outcomes. So I wanted to kind of maybe briefly answer that question. Why is my clicker? There we go. Kind of briefly answer that question and do maybe like a quick 101 on what I think is going on in a negotiation to try to help people think about how to structure their conversations with people kind of a little bit more deeply than I just shared with kind of the exercise, which was really about illuminating some of the dynamics. Often when people feel like they're in a conversation, so brigade and city or within a brigade, around like priorities or how to solve a problem, this is a dynamic that is not uncommon. Which is, we go back and forth, and then I say, well, we don't need you. We can go do our own thing. Oh, yeah, well, we can write terrible things about you and make you look bad. Oh, okay, no, please don't go do that. Oh, yeah, and we don't want to do that. We actually want to work with you. And then, ultimately, you might come to some arrangement. For many people, this is what kind of negotiating, dispute resolution, arguments, this is the process to which they would define how that goes. And there are good things about this process. The single best thing about this process is that everybody in the room is familiar with it. And don't underestimate the safety and security that comes with that familiarity. And your desire to do this simply because you are comfortable in this system. But there are a lot of things about this that are actually quite problematic. One is, the entire process is actually, in some levels, based to a certain degree on lying. It's like, well, I said I needed this, but then actually yesterday, when I said I needed that, I was kind of lying. I can actually just do this. Oh, you remember yesterday when I said I had to do this? I was kind of lying. I can actually just do this. And with each change, my credibility as a person making statements gets undermined. And so sometimes you actually see people in conversations have to counter that. They're like, well, no, this time it really is me telling the truth. This really is my bottom line. And now I'm going to cry to show you how painful it is emotionally for me to kind of make you believe this is it. Or I'm going to scream or I'm going to yell. People engage in all sorts of dysfunctional behaviors to show people that this is actually their new bottom line and that they can't concede anymore. Maybe they're like legitimately they can't, but maybe they can, and which is hard for us to tell. So we're basically lying to one another. And then the other piece here is, of course, as you get closer, I have all these data points to show me that you're willing to move. So as we get closer, people think the deal gets easier to be had. And it's actually sometimes the case, but sometimes very much the not, because I have all these data points to show me that you'll move. I'm like, surely you will move one small little bit because you've already done it 4 other times. And meanwhile, you're sitting there going, well, surely David will move because I've got all these data points to show me that he'll cave. And it actually can become even more aggressive as you get closer. And of course, the worst part about this is in almost all circumstances that you guys are negotiating, especially in a kind of a movement or organization level, it's not like you get to this point here and then it's like you shake hands and are never going to see each other again. Usually this is actually the starting point now of what is like the establishment of a longer term relationship. And it's like, oh, so we just beat the crap out of each other and lied to each other, and all so that we can now figure out, so we can start working together. This is awesome. And of course, some groups try to like play this by like, oh, we'll have different people do the negotiation than do the work, but it doesn't really work. If you are a brigade member, every interaction you have with someone who works at the city is setting the tone and modeling behavior about how city people should be expecting you to behave and how they should be expecting every subsequent brigade person to behave. So if you go and like make fun of them, or you go and belittle some work, you are reflecting and you are setting tone for how the city believes all brigade people henceforth are going to be behaving. It is a terrible thing that you are doing. Likewise, and I'm not trying, I'm in no way, I'm just using terrible examples to drive a point. I'm in no way trying to say that this is common. But like, a city official or an organization official who says, or a Code for America paid employee who makes someone feel small who is a volunteer, is setting tone about what that person's power is versus their power, about what the relationship is between us, and how we're going to interact with one another. So we are all setting tone all the time. We're setting the rules about how we're going to behave with one another in every single interaction we have. So really quickly, the model, and I want to be clear, I am merely a vessel for transmitting many of these ideas. Many smart people have spent decades thinking about this stuff, so I don't want no way for people to think that somehow I am responsible for this thinking. That would be amazing if I could claim that. But in those conversations where things go well, where you're in the coffee shop or in the office with someone, you are usually doing a few things right that you may not even be conscious of. The first thing that you're doing is you're trying to figure out all of the things that you actually care about and all the things that that other person cares about. Not just the thing that you say that you want or that they say that they want, but the underlying things that they're worried about, whether it's their reputation or a deadline that they haven't mentioned, or the fact that someone else is going to be pissed off at them that they haven't mentioned. You're trying to figure out all those things and how to solve for those problems as well. So we like to call this interests versus positions. Most people know, like in negotiation, have a position. This is the thing that I want. The interests are all the reasons why you want that thing. And in Getting to Yes, the wonderful story that explains this is, imagine that you have 2 kids, they're fighting over an orange, and you're watching TV, and you're like, is this the permanent fighting or the temporary fighting? And you're like, it's the permanent fighting. So you go downstairs, and your 2 kids are fighting, and you look at them, you go grab a knife, and you think about it, and I don't know why you guys are laughing, you terrible, terrible people. And you grab the orange and you slice it in half. You give half the orange to one kid, half the orange to the other kid. And it's like, you're like the hero, right? It's like problem solved, 50-50. Except for one of the kids runs off, peels the orange, eats the fruit. The other kid runs off, peels the orange, takes the fruit, throws it away, grabs the peel and starts grating it because they're making an orange flavored cake and they need the zest for the flavoring. And what's the one question you could have asked that actually could have doubled the value of that deal? Why? Why do you want the orange? In the conversations that you're having with the people that you already trust, you are not afraid to ask why. And more importantly, you are not afraid to divulge why you care. And that means that they have way more material and understanding and depth to work with you to figure out what are the options they can create that will make you happy and make them happy. And then we use what we call standards of legitimacy, so like benchmarks, to evaluate which of the options make sense. So what have other people done before in the past? What have we done before in the past? To try to figure out, is this feeling fair to me? And that when you have a great functioning conversation, you're basically bouncing between these 3 things. You all do this all the time with people that you trust. You just maybe didn't have like the language or the structure to describe that. And of course, what made this possible is that you have a great relationship with them and you have some pretty high skills around communicating. And that what we see in the conversations that go badly is that you have a very weak relationship. Maybe you don't know those players, or they dress differently than you, they talk differently than you think they have different priorities, you're making presumptions about them, so the relationship is weak, and you don't maybe have a history of communicating with them, or you do all your communications online, which is much more difficult. So these two things are weakened, and as a result, these things don't happen. And in a great negotiation, those things are great, you're doing all of these things. At some point you go, does it make sense for us to execute on this plan? You're like, no, actually my alternative's better. I should go do that. And people are like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, I understand. Or they go, yeah, we should definitely do this thing together. This is an amazing plan, let's go work. And the commitment's really clear, and you move on together. That was 2 days of negotiation theory, like literally fire hose down your throat in about 40 seconds. So I apologize that I don't have more time, but I can already see that people are coming to grab and take us all away. I would, in a good way, it's time. So I'm happy to talk about more of this with everybody. If you are interested in this type of things, I strongly recommend books like Getting to Yes and Difficult Conversations. I'm happy to hop on Skype and talk through this stuff with you. But please think, if you take nothing away from today, please think every time you're going into a meeting, what is the goal that you have in that meeting, and what's the baggage, the things that you think you know about that other person or the context that are going to sabotage you, and then figure out how you're going to be asking why to really understand what they care about so that you can devise solutions that make them happy and make you happy. Thank you guys so much.